I have an idea about what I think choosing knowledge means. And it basically goes back to the question, what are schools for?
The reason we decided to set up the conference, Choosing Knowledge, is because knowledge is a very controversial idea in education today. You'd think that was obvious. If you're a teacher, you're teaching knowledge, but you couldn't be further from the truth. What is relevant to the pupil is what drives the curriculum.
The problem with that is that a lot of us as individuals, our experience is very limited. If we actually just limit education to the realm of what we're familiar with, it's not going to take us far.
So we've inherited a very differentiated school system in terms of some kids getting access to knowledge and some kids getting access to not much at all.
The whole thing about education is that it should open doors and windows in your mind to new worlds that you would never experience in the reality that you live in, whether it's conceptual knowledge, whether it's actually abstract, whether it's to do with history or geography. How poor would we be if we only learned of the things we were familiar with in everyday life?
So I'm really pleased that we were able to invite some really fantastic outside speakers, friends of the school and friends of the project that we're engaged in. So Michael Young is very, very important because of his idea of powerful knowledge. Christine Council, someone who's really trying to explore how to deliver a knowledge-based curriculum at the level of school organisation. Martin Robinson, whose own version of his curriculum, the Trivium, and a classical model for it, is an obvious point of reference for us. And obviously Dennis Hayes, who's very critical of the therapeutic turn in education, which seems to be taking people away from knowledge. So I think together, all of these speakers give us a good starting point for a discussion.
For understandable reasons, people misunderstand what is meant by a knowledge-rich schooling. They think it's about teaching disconnected facts, it's about learning lists of things, and that could not be further from the truth. The question I put to parents who are thinking about where to send their children to school: how is the school going to take my child away from their everyday experience? What is it that the school is going to give them that I as a parent cannot give the child at home? What is it about the specialism of your teachers? What is it about the nature of your curriculum? What works of literature, of poetry, what scientific ideas are the children going to be learning in this school that they would not find and they would not encounter in their everyday lives? Essentially, what is the school adding to them? What is it that's going to make my child a more cultured, educated individual, the sort of person who can go out and take part in great conversations in society about politics and philosophy and economics?
They acquire knowledge that is not tied to specific contexts, specific experiences, specific people, specific examples. It's knowledge that's tied to what we call subjects, which in fact are, in a sense, the source of those kids being able to think not just about their experience, but beyond it.
The people gathered here today get the idea of why knowledge is important and get the idea why that's a challenge in terms of education. There's no doubt that we live in an argument about what it is that we should be doing in schools and that we're part of it. But for me, a central point to that argument is that you mean to do this for all children. So it's one thing arguing for knowledge, and another thing arguing that it's possible to teach knowledge to all children.
In the teaching profession, there's a saying that's well known by most teachers. It's called apples and pears, and it's a conservative idea. And it's the idea that only some people are destined to understand complicated ideas and to reach the top in education. That's meant usually the idea of grammar schools or private schools or a tiny group of people who can reach the top in comprehensives. I think that's wrong. I think it's possible to give education to all kids, to open their minds.
When you do that, and you try and stand up and do that, you get into an immediate problem. Our culture, in our society, puts excuses in the way all the time for why you can't do that for all children. Yes, you can do it for the top set. Yes, you can do it in a grammar school. Yes, you can do it in a top independent school. But all children? Are you crazy?
Do you want to know the truth? Some of them at the end of the day still will not take it. But let's start off reaching for the stars. Let's start off trying to give every kid the opportunity to be the best they can. And unfortunately in British education that has not been the case. It has been at the level of rhetoric, but not in reality. And this brings me back to East London Science School and a few other schools similar. They're genuinely trying to aspire to that type of education for every young person. And let me tell you, it is in one respect a very romantic ideal. At the cold face it often is the opposite. But by God, do I respect those teachers busting their gut, trying their very best to make that happen, to give every young person the possibility of what is such an exciting liberation and emancipation, because that's what a real knowledge-led education can be.
So a real highlight for me was the debate around the curriculum and witnessing colleagues from Michaela School as well as our own staff arguing out how teachers should take their lead in designing the curriculum. I think was a real highlight.
Should it be prescribed? Should the curriculum be prescribed? No. Straightforward. Why? Because to me pedagogy and the subject are intrinsically linked. If you design the curriculum, you're also designing how to teach it, and you're designing the discipline of the subject as well. So you're not only talking about this is the way this subject goes, how am I going to teach it? You're actually thinking how you're disciplining the kids at various points throughout as well. The whole thing is organic, if you like. It all holds together. The trouble with a national curriculum or any curriculum imposed is it takes away that from the teacher. So the teacher needs to be autonomous. Then we have the problem if every teacher is teaching their own thing, the kid doesn't get the story because it changes all the time, so they don't follow through. So the autonomy has to be communal.
Especially when you start off as a new teacher, I think that if you don't have a prescribed curriculum in place, what ends up happening is two things end up becoming the curriculum by proxy, and that's either what Ofsted wants, so they want to see engaging lessons, and if you're in a school like I was that's kind of very much beholden to Ofsted because it's received a low grade in recent years, you have no choice but to do as Ofsted would dictate and just kind of teach fairly vacuous, skillsy lessons that are slightly fun and engaging just for the sake of it. And secondly, if you don't prescribe the curriculum, you might end up just teaching to the exam. And that's also what happens in a lot of schools, particularly those that are under pressure, to ensure that they get great exam results.
My eldest, who goes to the local exam factory, who's in GCSE year this year, came back from school and said, "Run that past me again, Dad, iambic pentameter." And I nearly shot myself. She's year 11, and right from the beginning of school, it hasn't been drummed into her how important iambic pentameter is. You cannot escape East London Science School in year 7 without knowing the importance of iambic pentameter, and that's very much down to Summer's work on the curriculum, and it's repeated in year 8, and it's repeated in year 9 as the beating heart of English poetry. You have to know it to be able to understand English literature. And that's the key to dealing with the exam pressure and teaching to the exam. They have to know this, and they have to know this above and beyond what is going to be demanded at GCSE and at exam level. They have to know this knowledge, and it's having the confidence as a school and as a corpus and as a body of teachers that we know that this is important, that is our shield against the pressure when it comes to the examination boards. I imagine in the next 5-6 years there'll be a whole swathe of schools that will now start to call themselves knowledge schools, but they will not be able to change from their dastardly exam grade chasing ways, but they will call themselves knowledge schools. But they won't be able to break the habit, but that's what they'll call themselves.
The important thing, I think, is your guiding principles. The school needs to have some sort of set of guiding lights, if you like, a manifesto. And these guiding principles say that you must teach the best that's been thought, said and done, things like that, that you must have these things there. And we must argue about what the texts are. We can argue forever about what the text should be. And so we should, because these texts are important. These nuggets of knowledge are important, and the order in which they unfold. yeah, and the way that they're set up against each other, and that once you're involved in, and you see what I mean, that the whole, for me, the whole discipline comes from that whole discussion, and it needs to be thought about in terms of the subject, more so than the kids perhaps. This is the important art that we are creating here, yeah, and the kids will go along with it, I promise you. They damn well will. And when you've taught T.S. Eliot to kids, we're talking about kids who are, you know, school refusers and zooming around and truanting, when you're trying to get them to learn Murder in a Cathedral, line for line, you know, you make them do it, and they do it, because you're determined to teach this piece of work. And they feel that, they understand that. You are there, and you are driving this through, and they're part of that whole narrative. They're drawn along, they're taken along all the way.
The whole point of the conference is to start a conversation which we know we can't finish, you know, now, and therefore lead us into exploring this both as a school, ourselves, our own staff, but more broadly with people who we know are friends, some of them speaking in the conference today, who we know are looking at this issue in a sort of sympathetic way to us, and that will allow us to then recreate the curriculum that we are delivering on a kind of perpetual basis in an attempt to really build something valuable, not just for us, for our teachers and for our pupils, but hopefully for anybody else who wants to use it, take it. So it's kind of an open source project. I hope you get a lot from this snippet of the conference. It's a shame if you couldn't be there yourself, but hopefully you'll be able to come to our next events, and I hope to see you soon.